A disabled bobcat, starving and broken, was moments from death. But just when survival seemed impossible, something extraordinary happened. Not from another wild predator, not from a human hunter, but from a loyal dog who made a choice no one could have imagined. What began as an act of compassion spiraled into a dangerous standoff, pushing a man to risk everything he thought he knew about loyalty, mercy, and survival. As secrets surfaced and tensions exploded, one question remained: when nature and humanity collide in ways no one saw coming, who really decides who lives and who doesn't? Before we start, take a moment to comment your name or city. It's my way of remembering that behind each play is a real heartbeat. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Arizona foothills as Jack Halvorsen stepped onto his cabin's wooden porch. At 48 years old, his weathered face and graying beard told stories of both triumph and heartache. The cool autumn air filled his lungs as he watched his companion, Boone, bounce eagerly at the bottom of the steps. "All right, boy," Jack said, his voice rough from disuse. "Give me a minute." The search and rescue dog's tail wagged with barely contained excitement. Even after years of retirement from their mountain rescue work, Boone never lost his enthusiasm for their morning hikes. Jack grabbed his worn backpack, checking its familiar contents: water bottle, first aid kit, and trail mix. Old habits died hard. The quiet of the foothills wrapped around them like a familiar blanket as they set out. Jack's boots crunched on the gravel path leading to the abandoned logging road. Here, miles from the nearest neighbor, he found the solitude he craved after Sarah's death. 5 years had passed since the accident that took his wife, but some days the grief felt as fresh as yesterday. Boone trotted ahead, nose to the ground, occasionally glancing back to make sure Jack followed. The dog's mottled coat blended with the morning shadows as he weaved between pine trees. These walks had become their daily ritual, a way to outpace the memories that haunted Jack's dreams. "Keep it close, buddy," Jack called as Boone ventured further ahead. The old logging road curved through a stand of twisted juniper trees, their branches reaching like gnarled fingers toward the brightening sky. The peaceful morning shattered with Boone's urgent barking. Jack's pulse quickened. He knew that bark. It was the same one Boone had used countless times during their rescue work, signaling he'd found something important. "Boone," Jack picked up his pace, following the sound. As he rounded a bend in the road, he stopped short. About 50 feet ahead, Boone circled something cautiously, his barking now mixed with low whines. Jack's breath caught in his throat. Bobcat lay half hidden in the brush beside the road. Its normally muscular frame was gaunt, ribs visible through matted fur. But what drew Jack's attention was its back leg, clearly injured, twisted at an awkward angle. The wildcat's amber eyes locked onto him, a mix of fear and fierce defiance in its gaze. Years of training kicked in as Jack assessed the situation. The bobcat was badly hurt, probably the victim of a predator attack or maybe even a illegal trap. Without help, it would die slowly from starvation or exposure. His hands twitched toward the first aid kit in his pack, an old instinct to help, to save, to make things right. But this wasn't a lost hiker or a climber in distress. This was a wild predator, dangerous even in its weakened state. The smart thing would be to walk away, let nature take its course. That's what the local rangers would advise. That's what common sense dictated. Boone whined again, looking between Jack and the injured cat. The dog's behavior surprised Jack. Typically, Boone kept his distance from wild animals, but now he moved closer to the bobcat, his posture non-threatening, almost protective. The bobcat's ears flattened, but it made no attempt to flee or attack. Its chest heaved with labored breaths, and Jack could see blood matted in its fur. The morning sun illuminated its face, and for a moment, Jack saw something in those fierce eyes that reminded him of himself. Wounded, alone, fighting to survive, he stood frozen on the logging road, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Every rational thought told him to leave, to let the natural order of things play out. But something else pulled at him, the same instinct that had driven him into burning buildings, that had guided his hands during countless rescues. Sarah's voice echoed in his memory. "Sometimes the right choice isn't the easy one, Jack." The bobcat's eyes never left him as he wrestled with his conscience. Help a wounded predator, risking injury and breaking who knew how many wildlife regulations, or walk away and leave it to die, adding another weight to the burden of lives he couldn't save. Jack's fingers curled around the strap of his backpack as he stood at this crossroads. The morning sun climbed higher, casting dappled shadows through the juniper branches. Boone sat patiently, watching his master with knowing eyes, while the bobcat's labored breathing filled the silence. The choice hung in the air between them, as heavy as the grief Jack carried in his heart. In this moment of decision, Jack felt the familiar tug of duty warring. With compassion, the bobcat's fierce eyes seemed to challenge him, asking, what kind of man he truly was. One who walked away from suffering, or one who faced it head-on, regardless of the cost. The morning breeze rustled through the trees, carrying with it the scent of pine and possibility. Jack took a deep breath, knowing his next move would define more than just this moment. It would either reinforce the walls he built around his heart or begin to break them down. The morning air grew thicker as Jack cautiously approached the scene. Boone's excited barking echoed through the trees, bouncing off the rocky outcrops that dotted the hillside. The search and rescue dog had positioned himself in a wide circle around something Jack couldn't quite make out in the shadows of a juniper thicket. Boone, back, Jack commanded, his voice firm but controlled. The dog's ears perked up at his master's voice, but he maintained his position, tail now wagging with uncertainty. Come here, boy. Back off. Stepping closer, Jack finally got a clear view of what had captured Boone's attention. His breath caught in his throat. A bobcat lay there, its normally proud frame now gaunt and trembling. The animal's tawny fur was matted with dirt and what looked like dried blood. But what struck Jack most was its hind leg, clearly injured, twisted at an awkward angle that made his stomach turn. Easy now, Jack murmured, more to himself than the wild animal. The bobcat's amber eyes locked onto him, a weak snarl curling its lips. Despite its fierce expression, Jack could see the fear and exhaustion in those eyes. He'd seen that look before, in the faces of people he'd rescued from burning buildings. That mixture of defiance and desperate need for help. With another firm command, Jack finally convinced Boone to retreat to a safe distance. The dog whined but obeyed, watching intently as his master crouched down to assess the situation. The bobcat tried to rise, its snarl turning into a pitiful growl before its strength gave out. It collapsed back onto the ground, sides heaving. With labored breaths, Jack ran a scarred hand through his gray-streaked beard, knowing he was about to do something either very stupid or very right, maybe both. Sarah would have already had you wrapped in a blanket, he muttered, thinking of his late wife's boundless compassion for any creature in need. Moving with the careful precision he learned in his firefighting days, Jack shrugged off his jacket. The bobcat's eyes followed his every movement, but it had no energy left for resistance. When he gently wrapped the jacket around the injured animal, it only managed a weak hiss before going limp in his arms. The walk back to his cabin seemed longer than usual, each step measured to avoid jostling his dangerous cargo. Boone stayed close, but what surprised Jack was the dog's demeanor. Instead of the aggressive alertness he'd expect toward a predator, Boone showed an almost gentle concern, occasionally sniffing the air around the bundled bobcat. Jack's workshop stood separate from his main cabin, a sturdy shed where he kept his tools and did occasional woodworking to pass the time. Now it would serve as an impromptu animal hospital. He shouldered open the door, grateful he'd cleaned the space recently. The bobcat's weight was slight in his arms, too slight for a healthy adult of its size. What the hell am I doing? He muttered, clearing a workbench with one arm while cradling the injured animal. His mind raced through the basic veterinary knowledge he'd picked up over the years of working with search and rescue dogs. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. The old first aid kit from his pack contained supplies meant for humans. But antiseptic was antiseptic. Working carefully, Jack cleaned the worst of the wounds he could find. The leg was the biggest concern, not broken, thankfully, but badly damaged, possibly from a trap or a fight with another predator. Throughout his clumsy ministrations, the bobcat drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally twitching but offering no resistance. Jack fashioned a makeshift splint using materials from his workshop, all the while talking softly as he'd done with injured victims in his firefighting days. You're not making this easy on me, he said, wrapping the leg as best he could. Can't take you to a vet without raising questions, and can't just leave you out there to die. The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of the choice he'd made. What truly unsettled him was Boone's behavior. The dog had followed them into the workshop and now sat calmly by the door, head tilted, watching the proceedings with intelligent eyes. No barking, no aggression, just patient observation. In all their years together, Jack had never seen him so composed around a wild animal. After setting up a makeshift bed using old blankets in a large wooden crate, Jack carefully transferred the bobcat to its new temporary home. He placed water and some leftover chicken from his own dinner nearby, knowing the animal was too weak to eat now, but hoping it would survive the night. Standing in the workshop doorway, Jack watched the shallow rise and fall of the bobcat's chest. The setting sun painted long shadows across the floor, and he realized he'd spent hours tending to the injured creature. A cool breeze carried the scent of pine and approaching autumn, reminding him that he'd crossed a line today, one that could bring trouble if anyone found out. What do you think, boy? He asked Boone, Pooh looked up at him with knowing eyes. The dog's tail thumped against the floor once, twice. Jack shook his head, amazed at how quickly life could throw you a curveball. Yesterday, he'd been a simple retired firefighter living quietly in the foothills. Today, he was harboring an injured wild predator in his workshop, looking at the sleeping bobcat. Jack felt something shift inside him, a stirring of purpose. He hadn't experienced since leaving the fire service. It was more than just helping an injured animal. It was about choosing to care again. Despite the risks, the bobcat's presence in his workshop represented a commitment he couldn't easily undo. A secret that would require dedication and trust. As he locked up the workshop for the night, Boone at his heels, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he'd stepped onto a path that would change more than just his daily routine. The bobcat's fierce eyes, even in their weakened state, had awakened something in him. A reminder that life sometimes demanded action over caution, compassion over common sense. Jack trudged back to his cabin, the limp bobcat cradled awkwardly in his arms. Every few steps, he could feel its labored breathing against his chest. The shed stood just behind his house, a weathered wooden structure that had seen better days. Inside, old tools hung on rusted nails, and the concrete floor was swept, clean from years of habit. He laid the wildcat down on a pile of old blankets he kept for emergency gear. The animal didn't resist. It merely watched him with those piercing amber eyes. Too weak to fight, Jack's hands shook slightly as he filled an old bowl with water and placed it near the bobcat's head. "What am I doing?" he muttered to himself, running a calloused hand through his graying hair. "This isn't exactly legal, you know." The bobcat just blinked at him, its chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Jack had some venison in his freezer from last season's hunt. He thawed a portion quickly and cut it into small pieces. When he returned to the shed, Boone was sitting outside the door, his tail sweeping the ground in slow arcs. "You planning on keeping watch?" Jack asked his companion. The dog's intelligent eyes met his, and Jack could have sworn he saw understanding there. The next few days fell into an uncertain routine. Every morning, Jack would enter the shed cautiously, bearing fresh water and meat. The bobcat remained wary, but seemed to understand it needed help. It would wait until Jack stepped back before dragging itself forward to eat and drink. One evening, as Jack sat on his porch watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky in shades of orange and purple, he heard his neighbors' trucks in the distance. They were probably heading home from the local diner, where they gathered most nights to share stories and local gossip. Jack hadn't joined them in weeks, and now he had an even bigger reason to keep his distance. "Can't exactly tell them I'm harboring an injured predator," he said to Boone, who lay at his feet. The thought of their reactions made him uncomfortable. They were good people, but they had strong opinions about wildlife, especially predators that sometimes threaten their livestock. Night after night, Boone surprised Jack by refusing to come inside the cabin. Instead, the dog positioned himself by the shed door, maintaining his vigil over their secret guest. Jack would stand in his doorway, watching his faithful companion who seemed to have appointed himself guardian of the wounded creature. The real shock came one dawn. About a week into their unusual arrangement, Jack woke early, as usual, and stepped out onto his porch. The sky was just beginning to lighten, the stars fading one by one. What he saw stopped him in his tracks. Boone had managed to drag his food bowl from the cabin porch to the shed. The dog was gently nudging it toward the crack under the door, where small pieces of kibble disappeared into the darkness. Jack stood perfectly still, afraid to break the moment. His chest tightened with emotion. Here was his search and rescue dog, trained to track and find, showing more compassion than most humans would in the situation. The sight of Boone's gentle offering to a natural enemy struck something deep inside Jack's heart. "Well, I'll be damned," he whispered, his voice rough with feeling. The morning air felt lighter somehow, as if a weight had lifted from his shoulders. He wasn't alone in this anymore. Boone had made his position clear. Still, the isolation grew heavier in other ways. When Jack heard vehicles on the dirt road leading to his property, he'd tense up, worried someone might stop by unannounced. He made excuses to avoid town, ordering supplies online instead of visiting the general store. The secret weighed on him, but watching Boone's dedication to their injured guest made it easier to bear. Each morning, Jack would find Boone in the same spot, alert and protective. The dog's unwavering commitment to the bobcat's welfare seemed to justify Jack's own choice to help. Sometimes, in the quiet moments when he'd check on the animal's progress, he'd think about what his wife would have said about all this. "You always did have a soft spot for lost cousins," he could almost hear her say. That gentle teasing tone in her voice. The memory didn't sting quite as much as it used to. The bobcat's condition improved slowly. Its eyes grew clearer, and though the leg remained damaged, the animal began to show more spirit. It would watch Jack intently as he moved around the shed, its gaze less fearful and more curious. Sometimes, when Jack talked to it, a habit he developed despite himself, its ears would twitch forward, as if listening. One particular evening, as Jack approached the shed with fresh water and meat, he paused to watch Boone. The dog sat patiently by the door, head cocked to one side, ears perked forward. From inside came a soft sound, not quite a purr, not quite a growl, but something in between. It was the sound of a wild thing learning to trust, ever so slightly. Jack leaned against the shed wall, letting out a long breath. Guess we're all in this together now, aren't we, boy? He said to Boone. The dog turned to look at him, tail wagging slowly, before returning his attention to the door. In that moment, Jack felt less like someone breaking the law and more like someone doing exactly what he was meant to do. The stars appeared one by one above them, and the evening crickets began their chorus. Jack knew that somewhere beyond his property, people would disapprove of what he was doing. But here, in this quiet moment, with his dog showing more wisdom than any human he knew, Jack felt at peace with his decision. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Jack's property. As he made his way to the shed, carrying a cloth-wrapped package of fresh meat, his footsteps crunched on the gravel path, a sound that had become familiar to both Boone and their secret guest over the past week. Sarah Miller from next door was out in her yard, hanging laundry. She paused, shielding her eyes against the sun, as she watched Jack's predictable path to the shed. "Everything okay over there, Jack?" she called out, her voice carrying a note of curiosity. "Been seeing you make an awful lot of trips to that old shed lately." Jack's shoulders tensed, but he managed a casual wave. "Just organizing some tools," he replied, trying to keep his voice light. "Spring cleaning came late this year." Sarah nodded, but her expression remained skeptical. Jack could feel her eyes on his back as he disappeared into the shed. Inside, the Bobcat lifted its head weakly, its amber eyes tracking his movement. The animal was slowly gaining strength, though. Its injured legs still dragged uselessly behind it. Boone had taken a station himself outside the shed door, his protective instinct extending beyond just Jack now. The dog's behavior had shifted remarkably. Instead of showing aggression toward the predator, he acted more like a guardian, watching over both Jack and the injured cat with equal dedication. The next morning, Jack needed supplies. The small general store in town was usually quiet this early, but today there was a buzz of conversation that died down as he entered. Tom Bradley, the store owner, gave him an odd look as Jack gathered his items. "Heard you've been keeping busy out there, Jack," Tom said, running items across the scanner. "Sarah Miller mentioned something about strange noises coming from your property at night." Jack's heart skipped a beat, but he kept his expression neutral. "Probably just coyotes," he said, pulling out his wallet. "You know how they get this time of year." "Could be," Tom agreed, but his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "Martin Kellerman wasn't here earlier, talking about tracking a wounded bobcat that's been giving him trouble. Says it's been after his cattle." Jack's hands grew cold as he counted out bills. Martin Kellerman was the largest rancher in the county, known for his ruthless approach to predators that threatened his livestock. The man had made it his personal mission to eliminate what he called problem animals from his vast property. As if summoned by the mention of his name, the store's bell jingled, and Martin Kellerman himself walked in. He was a stocky man with sun-weathered skin and hard eyes that seemed to calculate everything in terms of threat or profit. His gaze fell on Jack, and a thin smile spread across his face. "Halvorsen," he said, nodding curtly. "Been meaning to have a word with you." Jack gathered his bags, keeping his movement steady despite the tension coursing through him. "What about, Martin?" Kellerman moved closer, his voice dropping. "Been hearing things. Strange sounds. Comings and goings." He paused, studying Jack's face. "You know, there are reckless people out there who put beast above lives. People who forget these animals are killers by nature." The threat in his words was clear, though carefully wrapped in casual conversation. Jack met his gaze steadily. "Is that so? Just looking out for the community," Kellerman continued. "When people interfere with nature, try to save things better. Left alone, it usually ends badly. For everyone." He emphasized the last words, letting them hang in the air between them. Jack nodded non-committally and headed for the door, feeling Kellerman's eyes boring into his back. The drive home was tense, his knuckles white on the steering wheel as he considered his options. The Bobcat was healing, but slowly. It wasn't ready to survive on its own yet, especially with Kellerman hunting for it. When he pulled up to his cabin, Boone was waiting at the gate, alert and watchful. The dog had developed an uncanny sense for when protection was needed. As Jack unloaded his supplies, he noticed Boone constantly positioning himself between the shed and the road, as if he understood the growing threat. That evening, Jack sat on his porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Boone lay at his feet, occasionally lifting his head to scan the surrounding area. The weight of secrecy felt heavier than ever, pressing down on Jack's shoulders. Like a physical burden, through the gathering dusk, he could see the lights of distant ranches, including Kellerman's sprawling property. The rancher's words echoed in his mind. People who forget these animals are killers by nature. But Jack had seen another side of nature in the past weeks. The gentle way Boone watched over the injured bobcat, the quiet trust developing between predator and protector. As night settled over the foothills, Jack heard the distant sound of a vehicle on the main road. Boone immediately rose, hackles slightly raised, and moved to his post by the shed. The dog's loyalty had expanded to include their unexpected guest, treating the bobcat as part of their small family that needed protection. The headlights passed without turning onto his drive, but the message was clear. The safety of their secret was growing more precarious by the day. Jack watched as Boone settled down outside the shed door, his faithful companion now standing guard over both their lives and their growing secret. The tension between keeping the bobcat hidden and the increasing risk of exposure was becoming a daily challenge, one that would only grow more difficult as time went on. Martin's presence in the store left Jack unsettled. He hurried home, his mind racing with worry about the bobcat's safety. The morning sun had barely cleared the mountains when he reached his property, where Boone greeted him with an enthusiastic tail wag. Inside the shed, Jack found the bobcat alert and watching him intently. Over the past weeks, the animal's frame had filled out somewhat, though its injured leg remained a concern. The cat had developed an unexpected tolerance for Boone, who now freely entered the shed during feeding times. "What are we going to do with you?" Jack muttered, checking the water bowl. The bobcat's ears twitched at his voice, a familiar response that made his chest tighten. He'd been considering release, but every time he examined the cat's leg, doubt crept in. The injury wasn't healing as well as he'd hoped. Boone padded into the shed, carrying his favorite rope toy. To Jack's amazement, the dog dropped it near the bobcat's makeshift bed before settling down nearby. The predator's amber eyes followed Boone's movements without hostility, a sight that still struck Jack as miraculous. "You're something else, buddy," Jack said, scratching behind Boone's ears. The dog had shown him that boundaries could blur, that natural enemies could find common ground. But Martin Kellerman's presence in town had shaken his fragile peace. The sound of tires on gravel shattered the quiet moment. Jack's heart jumped as he peered through the shed's dirty window. A massive black pickup truck was pulling up his driveway. Martin's truck. "Stay," Jack commanded Boone firmly, slipping out of the shed and closing the door securely. He walked toward the house, trying to appear casual despite his racing pulse. Martin climbed out of his truck, boots crunching on gravel. His weathered face was set in stern lines as he surveyed Jack's property. "Halvorsen," he called out, not waiting for a greeting. "Found some interesting tracks near your property line this morning." Jack kept his expression neutral. "That's so." "Bobcat tracks," Martin said bluntly, his eyes sharp. "Fresh ones. Leading this direction." He gestured toward Jack's land. "You seen anything suspicious lately?" "Can't say I have," Jack replied, forcing himself to meet Martin's gaze steadily. "Lots of wildlife passes through here." Martin's jaw tightened. "This isn't just any passing wildlife. This is the same cat that's been threatening my cattle. The one that disappeared a few weeks back." He took a step closer, his voice dropping. "Let me be clear, Halvorsen. If that cat shows up anywhere near my property, I won't hesitate. One bullet is all it takes." The threat hung in the air between them. Jack fought to keep his breathing even, aware that any reaction could betray him. "Your property. Your rules," he said carefully. "But it's probably long gone by now." "Maybe," Martin agreed, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But cats are territorial. They come back, especially if something's drawing them." His eyes drifted toward the shed. "Or someone's drawing them." Before Jack could respond, Boone emerged from behind the house, positioning himself between Jack and Martin. The dog's posture was alert, but not aggressive, a silent guardian. Martin's expression darkened at the sight of Boone. "Your dog's been acting strange lately, according to Sarah Miller. Says he spends hours by that shed of yours." He pointed to the wooden structure. "Mind if I take a look inside?" Jack's heart thundered in his chest, but years of handling emergencies had taught him to maintain composure. "Actually, I do mind," he said firmly. "That's private property, Martin. If you have concerns, take them to the game warden." A tense silence stretched between them. Martin's hand rested near his hip, where Jack knew he carried a holstered pistol. Finally, the rancher stepped back, a cold smile touching his lips. "Just remember what I said, Halvorsen. That cat shows up, it's dead." He turned toward his truck, then paused, And if I find out anyone's been interfering with nature's way, well, that's a federal offense, isn't it? Jack watched as Martin's truck disappeared down the driveway, dust billowing in its wake. Only then did he release the breath he'd been holding. Boone pressed against his leg, offering silent support. Inside the shed, the Bobcat was agitated, sensing attention from outside. Its injured leg dragged as it paced the small space, and Jack's heart sank. The animal wasn't ready for release. Its leg might never fully heal. But keeping it here had become desperately dangerous. Boone whined softly, moving to lie beside the Bobcat's bed. The dog's presence seemed to calm the wild animal, and gradually, it settled back down. Jack watched the unlikely pair, feeling the weight of his decision growing heavier by the minute. The cat wasn't strong enough to survive on its own, especially with Martin hunting it. But if he was discovered harboring it, he'd face serious consequences. The law was clear about interfering with wildlife. Yet as he watched Boone's gentle interaction with the injured predator, he knew he couldn't simply abandon it to die. "We'll figure something out," he whispered, more to himself than his unusual companions. But Martin's threat echoed in his mind, and for the first time since bringing the Bobcat home, Jack felt truly afraid, not for himself, but for the vulnerable creature that had unexpectedly become his responsibility. The first storm of winter descended on the foothills with unexpected fury. Jack stood at his kitchen window, watching dark clouds roll across the mountains like an advancing army. The wind howled through the pines, bending their tops and sending loose branches skittering across his yard. Inside the shed, the Bobcat lifted its head at the sound of the door creaking open. Jack entered, arms loaded with extra blankets and what remained of last week's venison. The cat's amber eyes followed his movements, no longer filled with the fear or hostility of those first days. "Storm's coming," Jack said quietly, laying down the supplies. "Might be stuck here a while." The Bobcat had grown stronger over the past weeks. Its coat had regained some luster, though the injured leg still dragged when it moved. Jack watched as the animal pushed itself up, limping carefully across the wooden floor to investigate the fresh meat. Boone squeezed in behind Jack, shaking off snow that had already begun to fall. The dog immediately went to the Bobcat, lying down nearby as it ate. Their unlikely friendship still amazed Jack. The way Boone would bring his toys to share, how he'd stand guard during the night. The wind rattled the shed's walls, making Jack frown. He'd need to reinforce the structure before the worst of winter hit. His firewood supply was running low too. He hadn't planned on heating the shed through the cold months when he'd stacked the wood pile in autumn. Later that evening, as the storm intensified, Jack sat in his cabin reviewing his dwindling supplies. The list was troubling. Barely enough dog food to last 2 weeks, medical supplies running short, and the venison nearly gone. He'd have to make a trip to town soon. But the thought filled him with dread. Every visit meant dodging questions, avoiding Martin Kellerman's suspicious glares. The wind shrieked outside, and Jack's thoughts turned to the shed. He pulled on his heavy coat and boots, grabbing a flashlight before heading out into the storm. Snow stung his face as he fought his way across the yard. Inside the shed, the Bobcat was pressed into the corner, eyes wide at each thunderous gust. Boone lay beside it, offering silent comfort. The sight squeezed something in Jack's chest. This strange family they'd become, all of them seeking shelter from different storms. "What am I doing?" he whispered, watching the Bobcat lean against Boone's steady presence. The animal was healing, yes, but at what cost? Every day brought new risks. If Martin discovered the truth, the consequences would be severe. Even if they avoided detection, what future could there be for a crippled predator? The next morning broke clear and bitter cold. Jack trudged through knee-deep snow to check the shed, finding the Bobcat attempting to pace the small space. It moved with more confidence now, though the injured leg would never fully heal. The sight that once would have brought hope now filled him with uncertainty. "You're stronger," he told the cat, watching it limp past. "But you'll never be strong enough, will you?" The Bobcat paused, turning those intelligent eyes toward him. In them, Jack saw his own trapped reflection, both of them caught between what was right and what was possible. Boone whined softly, nudging Jack's hand. The dog had shown such wisdom in this situation, such unexpected gentleness, but had they all become prisoners of their own compassion? The shed that had been sanctuary now felt like a cage. The secrecy a weight too heavy to bear. As Jack worked to clear paths through the snow, his thoughts circled like winter ravens. He'd saved the Bobcat from certain death, yes, but had he only prolonged its suffering? A wild creature needed freedom to truly live. Yet freedom, with that crippled leg, might be just another path to death. The day wore on, and Jack split what little would remain, his axe biting into frozen logs as doubts gnawed at his conscience. Each stroke seemed to echo the same question. Was he truly helping, or was his intervention making things worse? The Bobcat watched from the shed's window, its gaze a constant reminder of the responsibility he'd chosen to bear. That evening, as another storm gathered on the horizon, Jack sat in his cabin with Boone at his feet. The dog's head rested heavy on his knee, offering comfort in the growing darkness. Outside, the wind began to rise, carrying with it the sound of choices yet to be made and consequences yet to unfold. "We're in deep, aren't we, boy?" Jack murmured, scratching Boone's ears. The dog's eyes met his, full of trust and certainty that seemed to transcend Jack's human doubts. But as the storm clouds gathered and supplies dwindled, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that their act of mercy had led them down a path from which there might be no easy return. The next morning brought no relief. The storm had intensified into a full blizzard, turning the world outside Jack's cabin into a whirling wall of white. He'd spent half the night checking on the shed, reinforcing its walls against the merciless wind. The Bobcat had huddled close to Boone, both animals sharing warmth in the darkness. Around midnight, the familiar wail of search and rescue sirens pierced through the howling storm. Jack's heart quickened. He knew those sirens meant trouble. His emergency radio crackled to life, confirming his worst fears. Martin Kellerman's 16-year-old son hadn't returned from checking their cattle fence lines in the canyon. Jack didn't hesitate. Despite his complicated feelings toward Martin, a child's life hung in the balance. He grabbed his winter rescue gear, the same equipment he'd used countless times in his firefighting days. "Come on, Boone," he called, and the dog immediately rose from his bed, alert and ready. In the shed, the Bobcat watched them with gleaming eyes as Jack equipped Boone with his search and rescue vest. "Stay put," Jack told the cat firmly, though something in its gaze made him uneasy. The storm hit them full force as they joined the gathering search parties. Martin's weathered face was etched with fear as he coordinated with the rescue teams. When he saw Jack and Boone, surprise and gratitude flickered across his features. "Halvorsen." Martin nodded, his voice rough. "Tommy went to check the south fence. Radio's dead." Been 3 hours. The unspoken truth hung heavy in the air. In these conditions, 3 hours could mean death. They split into teams, each taking different sections of the canyon. Jack and Boone headed southeast, where the terrain grew treacherous. The visibility was terrible, maybe 20 feet at best. The wind drove ice crystals like tiny needles into any exposed skin. Even Boone, with his thick coat, struggled against the elements. 2 hours into the search, the situation grew desperate. The official teams had lost several trail markers in the whiteout conditions. Radio communication became sporadic, filled with static. The temperature continued to plummet. Jack's hands had gone numb despite his heavy gloves. His thoughts kept returning to Tommy, just a kid, probably huddled somewhere, slowly freezing. The same helpless feeling he'd had when he couldn't save. His wife threatened to overwhelm him. Suddenly, Boone's behavior changed. His nose lifted, and he began pulling hard against his lead. Jack knew better than to question his dog's instincts. They veered east, toward a dangerous ravine that cut deep into the canyon wall. The wind seemed to scream through the narrow passage, creating ghostly howls that made Jack's skin crawl. Boone pressed forward, but the terrain grew increasingly treacherous. Ice-covered rocks threatened to give way under their feet. That's when Jack saw it, a shadow moving through the curtain of snow. His flashlight beam caught a familiar limping gait, and his heart nearly stopped. The Bobcat stood 20 feet ahead, its mottled coat dusted with snow. It shouldn't be out here. Couldn't survive these conditions with its injury. Yet there it was, staring intently at them before turning to look deeper into the ravine. Boone whined, tugging harder. The Bobcat took a few steps forward, then looked back at them again. Jack had seen enough animal behavior to recognize intention when he saw it. The predator was trying to show them something. "Lead on, boy," Jack whispered to Boone, letting the dog follow the Bobcat's path. The cat stayed just ahead of them, its injured leg leaving a distinctive track in the snow. It moved with purpose, choosing paths that avoided the worst of the ice and wind. As they pressed deeper into the ravine, Jack realized the Bobcat was leading them to a place where the canyon walls provided some shelter from the storm. The winds howl diminished slightly, and in that relative quiet, Boone's ears perked up. A faint sound carried through the darkness, someone crying. The Bobcat stopped at the mouth of a small cave, formed by fallen rocks. There, huddled in the deepest corner, was Tommy Kellerman. The boy's face was pale with cold, his lips blue, but he was alive. He was alive. "Tommy," Jack rushed forward, immediately pulling out his emergency blanket and radio. The boy was barely conscious, mumbling about losing his way in the whiteout. As Jack worked to warm him and call in their location, he glanced back toward the cave entrance. The Bobcat stood watching, its amber eyes reflecting Jack's flashlight beam. Boone sat near it, both animals guardians in the storm. In that moment, Jack understood something profound about the nature of mercy. How it could come from the most unexpected sources, transcending the boundaries humans tried to put around it. The sound of approaching rescuers echoed through the ravine. The bobcat melted away into the swirling snow as quickly as it had appeared. Limping but deliberate in its retreat, Jack held Tommy close, warming him as best he could, while Boone kept vigil at the cave entrance. They had found the boy, but the night's revelations weren't just about saving a human life. They were about the mysterious ways that compassion could bridge the divide between wild and tame, between foe and friend. Through the howling wind and stinging snow, Jack and Boone followed the bobcat's halting progress. The injured predator moved with surprising sureness despite its limp, choosing paths that avoided the worst ice patches. Every few yards it would pause, looking back as if to ensure they were still following. The ravine walls loomed like ghostly sentinels in the whiteout conditions. Jack's flashlight beam caught glimpses of treacherous drops, where the ground simply disappeared into white nothingness. His boots crunched through layers of frozen snow, each step requiring careful consideration. Steady, Boone, Jack murmured, as his dog navigated the dangerous terrain. The search and rescue harness jingled softly with each of Boone's movements. Despite the bitter cold, Jack felt sweat freezing against his skin beneath his winter gear. The stakes were too high for mistakes. The bobcat led them along a narrow shelf of rock, barely wide enough for safe passage. Jack pressed his shoulder against the canyon wall, fighting vertigo as his flashlight beam revealed a 4-foot drop to their left. The wind threw snow in savage gusts, threatening to unbalance them suddenly. The bobcat stopped, its ears swiveled forward, and it stared intently at something ahead. Jack raised his flashlight, and the beam caught a flash of color against the gray rock face. A piece of torn jacket material. "Hello," Jack called out, his voice nearly lost in the wind. Tommy, a weak cry answered him. There, on a narrow ledge, barely 4 feet wide, huddled Tommy Kellerman. The teenager was pressed against the rock face, his clothes crusted with ice. His face showed the deadly pallor of advanced exposure. "Hold on, Tommy," Jack called out. "We're coming to get you." The ledge Tommy was on had no easy access. A gap of about 6 feet separated it from their position. Jack could see where the boy had likely slipped down from above, ending up trapped on this precarious perch. Working quickly, Jack pulled rescue gear from his pack. His hands shook with cold as he secured his climbing rope to a sturdy rock formation. Boone watched attentively, understanding from years of rescue work that his moment would come. "Tommy, I'm going to send my dog over first," Jack explained, raising his voice above the wind. "He's trained for this, just stay still." At Jack's command, Boone carefully picked his way across the gap, using a slight slope in the rock to reach Tommy's ledge. The dog immediately pressed against the shivering teenager, offering warmth and stability. Tommy's arms went around Boone's neck, clinging to the animal's solid presence. The bobcat observed all this from its position several yards back, its amber eyes reflecting Jack's flashlight whenever he glanced that way. It seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, maintaining its vigilant watch. Jack secured himself and made the crossing, moving with the careful precision that search and rescue work had drilled into him. The ledge was barely wide enough for all of them. He could feel Tommy trembling as he worked to secure a rescue harness around the boy. "You're doing great," Jack reassured him, checking the rope connections twice. "Boone's got you. We're going to get you back to your dad." Tommy nodded weakly, his teeth chattering too hard for speech. Boone stayed pressed against him, a steady presence as Jack prepared for the most dangerous part of the rescue. They would have to traverse back across the gap and then navigate the treacherous path back through the ravine. As they began their careful return journey, Jack noticed the bobcat was already moving, once again taking point along their exit route. Its injured leg didn't seem to hamper its ability to find the safest path through the storm. Jack felt a surge of amazement. This wild creature, which he had sheltered despite all logic and law, was now guiding them to safety. The trek back was painfully slow. Tommy stumbled several times, but between Boone's steady support and Jack's secure hold on the rescue rope, they kept him upright. Through it all, the bobcat remained just visible ahead, its form appearing and disappearing in the swirling snow like some ancient spirit of the canyon. When they finally reached wider ground where the rescue teams could reach them, the bobcat paused one final time. It turned to look at them, its gaze meeting Jack's for a long moment. Then, with the same deliberate movement it had shown all along, it limped away into the storm, disappearing into the white void. Jack watched it go, struck by the weight of what had just happened. The predator he had chosen to save had, in turn, helped save a human life, whether by pure instinct or something deeper. It had repaid the kindness Boone had shown it in the shed, with an act of guidance that had made this rescue possible. The rescue team quickly transported Tommy to safety, wrapping him in thermal blankets and rushing him to the nearest hospital. Word of the miraculous rescue spread through the small community like wildfire, carrying with it the incredible detail of the Bobcat's role in leading them to the stranded teenager. 2 days later, Martin Kellerman's truck pulled up to Jack's property. The rancher's usual stern demeanor had softened, replaced by something more complex, a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. He stepped out of his vehicle slowly, as if carrying a heavy weight. "Tommy's doing well," Martin said as he approached Jack on the porch. His voice was rough with emotion. "Doctor says another are out there," and he left the sentence unfinished, running a weathered hand across his face. Jack nodded, understanding the unspoken words. Boone sat alert beside him, tail thumping gently against the wooden boards. "Listen," Martin continued, shifting his weight uncomfortably. "About that Bobcat, Tommy told me everything. How it appeared out of nowhere. How it led you straight to him." He paused, struggling with words that seemed foreign to his tongue. "I've spent my whole life seeing predators as the enemy. Lost too many calves. Too much livestock to count. But now, nature's not always what we think it is," Jack offered, quietly. Martin's eyes met his, and there was a new understanding there. "Tommy says you've been helping it. The Bobcat, that it's injured." Jack tensed slightly, but Martin held up a hand. "I'm not here to cause trouble, just, I can't ignore what happened. That animal could have attacked my boy, weak or not. Instead, he shook his head in disbelief. Around town, the story had taken on an almost mythical quality. Some folks claimed it was pure coincidence, a wild animal accidentally crossing paths with rescuers. Others spoke in hushed tones about divine intervention, about the mysterious ways grace could manifest in the world. "I've been thinking," Martin said, his voice growing firmer. "My land borders yours to the north. There's a stretch of protected valley there, good hunting grounds. When that cat's strong enough," he cleared his throat. "Well, let's just say I won't be setting any traps in that area anymore." The significance of this offer wasn't lost on Jack. Martin Kellerman, who had spent decades defending his ranch from predators, was effectively creating a safe passage for the very creature he'd once sworn to destroy. "Thank you," Jack said simply. Martin nodded, then turned to leave. At his truck, he paused. "You know, my grandfather used to say every life has purpose, even if we can't see it. Never really believed that until now." He climbed into his vehicle, but before closing the door added, "Take care of that cat, Halvorsen. Some debts can't be repaid with words alone." The morning dawned crisp and clear as two wildlife service vehicles pulled up Jack's gravel driveway. Their arrival marked the beginning of a bittersweet farewell that Jack had known was coming, but still wasn't fully prepared for. The sanctuary officials, dressed in their khaki uniforms, brought specialized equipment for safely transporting the Bobcat. "We've got a place set up at the Mountain Haven Wildlife Sanctuary," explained Dr. Sarachen, the lead veterinarian. "It's protected land, plenty of natural prey, and we can monitor its recovery without interference." Jack led them to the shed, Boone padding faithfully beside him. The dog had grown so accustomed to his unusual friend that he whined softly as the officials prepared their equipment. Inside, the Bobcat watched them with those fierce amber eyes, but there was less fear now. Less defensive hostility. "You've done a remarkable job with its initial care," Dr. Chen commented, examining the healing leg. "Most people wouldn't have given it a chance." Jack thought about those first days, the uncertainty and risk. "Wasn't just me," he said, glancing at Boone. "He saw something in this cat before I did." The transfer went smoothly. The Bobcat, perhaps sensing the professional's expertise, allowed itself to be sedated and carefully moved into the transport cage. Jack watched as they secured the carrier, his throat tight with unexpected emotion. Boone pressed against his leg, sharing the moment of farewell. Martin Kellerman had arrived too. Standing respectfully off to the side, his presence spoke volumes about how much had changed. The rancher who once would have shot the predator on sight now bore witness to its safe relocation. His own perspective transformed by the night it had helped save his son. "Quite a thing," Martin said quietly, "how life throws you curves. Never thought I'd see the day I'd be hoping a Bobcat makes it." Jack nodded, understanding completely. The past weeks had shifted something in him too. Awakened parts he thought had died with his wife. Caring for the injured predator, watching Boone's extraordinary bond with it develop, had reminded him that healing could come from the most unexpected sources. As the sanctuary team made final preparations, Dr. Chen approached Jack with a small smile. "We'll tag it for tracking. Make sure it adapts well to the sanctuary. You're welcome to check on its progress anytime." "Appreciate that," Jack replied, his voice gruff with emotion. The Bobcat was fully alert now, watching them through. "The carrier's great." Its eyes found Jack's, and in that moment of connection, He saw not the dangerous predator he'd first encountered, but a fellow survivor who had helped him as much as he'd helped it. Boone walked to the carrier, sitting beside it one last time. The bobcat stretched out a paw, touching the great ear where the dog's nose pressed against it. The wildlife team exchanged amazed glances at this display of trust between natural adversaries. "Never seen anything like it," one of the officials murmured. As they carefully loaded the carrier into their vehicle, Jack felt a profound sense of completion. The risk he'd taken, driven by an old instinct to save life, had rippled out in ways he never could have predicted. It had softened Martin's heart and heart, shown the community a different way of seeing, and most importantly, had begun to heal his own wounded spirit. Boone stayed by his side as they watched the vehicles pull away, their tires crunching on gravel. The dog's tail wagged gently, not in sadness, but in what seemed like understanding. They had both learned that compassion could bridge the widest of gaps, that mercy extended in the face of fear could transform more than just the recipient. In the quiet aftermath of the bobcat's departure, Jack scratched behind Boone's ears, grateful for his companion's wisdom. "You knew all along, didn't you, boy?" he said softly. "Sometimes the ones we're supposed to fear are the ones who teach us the most." The morning sun caught the silver in Jack's beard as he gazed toward the mountains, where the bobcat would make its new home. The experience had reminded him of something essential, that even broken things, whether injured predators or grieving hearts, could still carry profound purpose. In reaching across the boundaries of species and fear to help another living creature, he had found his own way back to life. If this story found you at the right moment, subscribe and stay close. Tomorrow's may be the reminder you didn't know you needed.